Heritage and I are fully supportive of this action against Iran. We think it's totally justified. In fact, it's prudent that the president has done so. However, it's really important that it be as short-term as possible. This isn't beginning a forever war. It's bringing to an end a forever war. And we believe that's how the administration is operating. If they continue to operate with that mantra, then this will be short-lived and hopefully successful.
Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we have a very special episode today where we're going to be focusing on the newly released Heritage Foundation's report, the 2026 Index of Military Strength and Readiness. The title of this report is Restoring Peace Through Strength, and that's not just a slogan. It's an agenda. And this report is really important. It's not opinion or guesswork. It's a diagnostic of where we really stand right now with our military in terms of all of the wars that we might need to fight in the future, and even more importantly, preventing those wars from even happening. And of course, all the greatest minds at Heritage Foundation contributed to making this report. And while we're talking about great minds at Heritage Foundation, let's bring in the star of our show, Dr. Kevin Roberts. Kevin, thanks for joining us on your show.
It's always a pleasure to join you on my show.
I want to get into this report, obviously, but the events of the last couple of days with the military strike against Iran sort of really draws this report into focus. And before we get into how it impacts our military readiness, I've seen a lot of different voices out there, many who are conservative or claim to be conservative, who suggest that this was not actually in line with the conservative policy and historic policy of conservatives in America, this strike against Iran. Where do you stand on that?
Well, Heritage and I are fully supportive of this action against Iran. We think it's totally justified. In fact, it's prudent that the president has done so. However, it's really important that it be as short-term as possible. And that's where the most legitimate observations by friends of the administration are important to keep in mind. And that is, it's very important this not turn into a nation-building exercise. And the reason is that's where there wouldn't be constitutional authority. That's one of the lessons that we've drawn from the Iraq War, for example. We've talked on this show, Larry. You and I have talked for years, as long as we've known each other, about the fact that I'm a recovering neocon. I, like many conservatives in the early 2000s, thought it was a great idea not only to invade Iraq, but to build a democracy, as if we could somehow implant American democratic principles wherever we want. We know that's not the case, but this is what I would tell friends on the right who are a little circumspect about this action. Donald Trump knows that too.
Yeah.
And the best way that we can help his administration, and for that matter, our servicemen and servicewomen, is to be supportive of the action and to continue to talk in friendly terms about the necessity of this being short-term. Every relevant member of the cabinet, in other words, who's involved in this kind of activity, has said as much. We can be good friends on the outside by reminding of that.
It is amusing and entertaining, though, to see people who were never on board with America First policy now suggesting that they know better what America First policy is, better than the president himself. But I looked at this strike and thought there's nothing more America First than this. We did not get down on our knees and beg the UN to support it or European allies to join some sort of coalition. We know that they're a threat. We had the opportunity to strike, and we did it. That's the definition of America First military policy, isn't it?
It is. And I think the person who put it best is our Heritage colleague, Dr. Victoria Coates, who heads up our entire national security team.
Yeah.
And she said, this isn't beginning a forever war. It's bringing to an end a forever war.
Yeah.
And I think first of all, I think that's very accurate. And we believe that's how the administration is operating. If they continue to operate with that mantra, then this will be short-lived and hopefully successful.
Well, the other part of the Iran military strike is how it affects our overall readiness, and that's what we're really talking about today. So let's get to that component a little later. First, sort of the big picture sort of focus on this report. The title, let's start with the headline, Restoring Peace Through Strength. Peace through strength is not just a slogan here. It really is a policy. What do you mean by restoring peace through strength?
Well, for years, Heritage, through its index of military strength, has been trying to show policymakers what they needed to do in terms of which munition systems, other weapons programs they should invest in order to make sure that the American people could be defended. Along the way, we've gone through these iterations of conservative national security in which it has become fashionable to use this phrase, peace through strength, as sort of a trope. It's a very important phrase. It comes from Reagan, obviously. But at Heritage, we not only really mean it, we try through this index to show how policymakers should actually fund such an idea. And the way we say that is we want the most lethal, most efficient, best military in the history of the world. It should be used sparingly, obviously. We talked about one example just now in which I think that's the case. But ultimately, we have seen over the last decade, especially from the first year of Obama's presidency to the last year of Biden's, no coincidence, that there's been a degradation in American military strength. Finally, we're beginning to see some glimmers of hope, but we have a lot of work to do to get to peace through strength.
Yeah, and by the way, y'all need to know this report is referenced and used every single year it comes out, and all of the smartest people and most important people in Washington, D.C. rely on this report. This is a big deal.
It is. We have, when I first got it at Heritage 4 or so years ago, I knew about the index just as a consumer, but I wasn't prepared for the fact that there were members of the Senate, members of the House who were calling us saying, when's the report coming out? I mean, it really is a guidebook. And I say that with great institutional humility. We do serve the American people first and then these policymakers second, but they really will take this as the guidebook of which policies that they need to implement.
Yeah, so if you get the executive summary and you try to go for the top line summary or the bottom line, what the report card says, the term used this year is marginal in terms of our military strength. But by the way, that's actually a little bit better than it was under President Biden, if I remember right.
It is for a couple of years.
Marginal is an improvement.
It is. I mean, that really provides some context, right? For a couple of years, we marked America's military preparedness as weak, and I remember the first year that we concluded we needed to do that. We had an internal meeting. We huddled, and we knew that's what we needed to say because that's what the data show, but we were afraid to do so, even though we ended up doing it, because we didn't want to contribute unintentionally to the declining morale of our servicemen and servicewomen. But we decided that on their behalf, most importantly on behalf of the American people, we needed to do so. Therefore, this year, when we're back to marginal, while there is still a lot of room for improvement, as the word marginal would suggest, we ought to take some solace and encouragement in the fact that just in 1 year of being in charge and reinvesting in America's military, the Trump-Vance administration has made a difference.
Yeah. So now, my role on this show is to know just enough information to get myself into trouble.
Yeah, and I noticed you're really good at that.
Yeah, thanks. You've been talking to my wife. So explain some of the things that are in this report that someone like me, not an expert, would sort of read and need a little help understanding. For instance, the MRC benchmark. This is the regional conflict. We need to be able to engage in 2 major regional conflicts at the same time. Is that right?
It is. That's one of the most important criteria we use because if you look at history, too often the United States has had to be engaged in 2 theaters of war, two major regional conflicts, as we term them in the index. And we have homed in on that metric in recent years because it's even more likely in the last generation of history.
Right.
For example, we're now currently very active in the Middle East and Iran. What if, while we're there, although we don't think that this is going to happen, the Chinese would invade Taiwan? Yeah. This is precisely the kind of thing that we theorize so that we can understand how quickly the United States military would go through its stores of weapons. And right now, our ability to wage both of those theaters of war would be marginal.
Marginal.
That's where that comes.
There we go. Okay, so and this is a very real world example because, as you know, the build up to the military strike against Iran, we had the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group there in the region. We sent the Ford over there to the other side of the Persian Gulf, I think at the Strait of Hormuz. Sorry if I got that wrong. So yes, what's in the Pacific right now? I know we've got some assets in Okinawa and up and down the Pacific Rim, but are we spread too thin at the moment, like as we speak?
Well, our coverage is marginal. I mean,
there it is.
Pedantic there. And then the other potential theater that I would mention is Latin America. I mean, the administration deserves a tremendous amount of credit for revitalizing the Monroe Doctrine. This is really important for Americans themselves. What if, for example, Venezuela were to go sideways? Or what if Cuba were to, God forbid, require some sort of military intervention, and we were now possibly engaged in not just 1 and not just 2, but 3 theaters of war? We doubt our ability to do that, just from the standpoint of munitions capacity.
Yeah. I remember reading about that. In fact, we're going to get to the munitions capacity and our stockpiles, or lack thereof, and the depleted stockpiles a little bit. Let's talk about where we're good. Where are we strong right now, based on the index? What are we doing right, and what should we keep doing in that direction?
Well, we look at each branch of the armed forces, and of course, we are ecumenical on this show. They're all equally important. But for example, the Marine Corps is very strong. It's very strong because of leadership, because of good investment by Congress. Some components of the Army, I'm talking about munition systems, are okay because of investments there. The other thing that's improved that is softer, obviously, than, say, hard power, hard munition system, is that morale has dramatically improved. In fact, morale improved just after Trump won office. Even people who didn't vote for him, if they were military veterans, realized, oh, this is someone who understands the importance of the military. You remember the news cycle at the tail end of Biden's presidency was really focused on how difficult it was to recruit men and women into the military. That was reversed by the time Inauguration Day came around. And of course, that trajectory has continued. So all of the branches of the armed services doing better in that regard. Of course, we would like to see a situation in which even more young Americans are physically able to pass the fitness test to get into the armed forces. That's outside the domain of the index of military strength. But when you're improving morale and people see the investment in the military and they see it being used constitutionally, sparingly, with great communication from the president, all these things start to feed one another, and we could see improvement across the board.
So it turns out hiring Dylan Mulvaney as the recruiting spokesperson for them, but probably not a good plan there from the Biden administration.
Probably not.
I said that, not Kevin Roberts. Don't get him in trouble. He's already in enough trouble. I was surprised to see that Space Force was rated as marginal, because Space Force was sort of the new flavor on the block here in Washington. They got a lot of funding, and everybody, you ask anyone in the military, they'll tell you that what Space Force is doing and cyber attacks, that's really the next frontier.
Basically, they've not had the time to build the infrastructure for us to be able to say that their readiness is more than marginal. It's improving. We would anticipate that next year and the year after it will improve thereafter, but it's going to require not just continued investment, Larry, but continued investment in the right things. Yeah. And that's one of the things that sort of the secondary purposes the index has served. Is there is this impulse on the political right in Washington to fund the military. That's a noble objective. But sometimes that noble objective is actually served by an ulterior motive, which is a very legitimate but ulterior motive of members of Congress who want to be sure that certain things are funded in their districts.
Right.
Now, nothing against the men and women who are serving in those districts, right? But if that's a munitions program that was for a war in the 1980s, that needs to be cycled out, and we need to make investments in different areas.
Yeah, so that was going to be one of the challenges, because a lot of people will say, we're already spending enough on our military right now. We're spending too much on our military right now. And is this index really just sort of a wish list to spend more money and enrich the military-industrial complex? Does the index focus on making sure that we're spending more money, or is it more about how we're spending that money smartly?
It's a very fair devil's advocate question, because the impulse in Washington, whether it's through legitimate desires to serve your district if you're a member of Congress, or something else if you're a K Street lobbyist, is to just spend more money. And the argument would go, by virtue of spending more money, your military is better prepared. In fact, we mention examples in our other research over the last few years of spending more money on the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, on things that are so bad you're actually undermining your ability to be ready. So in fact, the purpose of this index is the exact opposite. And that is to be a guidebook to spending on the right things to help Congress make what sometimes are some politically difficult decisions.
So when the report says that there are years of underfunding, does that mean we're not spending enough writ large on the military, or is it really more about strategic confusion about where we're spending money or how we're spending that money?
It's both. Certainly under the Obama and Biden years, we weren't spending enough top line. We're saying that top line figure needs to be increased, whether it needs to be the $500 billion that President Trump has suggested, a 50% increase, is an open question until you answer the second question, which is on which programs, on which systems, on which parts of the various branches of the armed services do you need to spend that money? You answer those questions and then arrive at the top line figure.
Yeah.
And that way you can make sure that you're being more efficient. There's a good reason that almost every adult American uses the Pentagon as a joke. the $900 toilets and so on,
Yeah.
because they've done those things. And so part of the Pentagon reform that Secretary Hegseth has been heroic in leading is not just in looking for a higher top line number of spending, but on spending on the right things so we can be better prepared for the next war. In other words, if we're going to judge at Heritage in the next iterations of the Index of Military Strength that America's military has moved from marginal to something better, it isn't going to be because they just plussed up the budget.
Right.
It's going to be because they've spent on the right things.
So the president has called for, I think it's a $1.5 trillion budget. That's $500 billion more than currently is. Now, last I checked, a conservative principle is to be fiscally conservative and not spend money that we don't have. So, and I use my funny little conservative voice there advisedly because it's true. I mean, how much more debt can we take on? And is that the kind of debt that we should be taking on?
We've got to be really clear about what we would be spending that on. And so while Heritage believes it's possible that there might be $500 billion of worthy systems and programs to be spent on, we want to see what that list is so that we can analyze it. And then the second thing is very much to your point, if in fact we conclude that that amount of money or something close to that amount of money is justified, then we want to look for budget offsets in other parts of the budget. Now, in a budget as large as the federal government's is, there are some opportunities there.
Yeah.
And so we would argue, have your cake and eat it too. Spend what is deemed absolutely necessary on defense. We in particular are big advocates for spending more on our submarine force. My colleague Brent Sadler has been the lone voice, it seems, some years in arguing for greater expenditure there. Do that. Let's go find an offset in other parts of the budget so that we don't tax the American people to death.
One really interesting thing about the index I found is that you don't just assess our budget and our weapon system and things. You assess where we're going to be fighting, the regions in which we're going to be fighting, the operating environment, as you put it. So we could break down every region, or maybe if you want to bring up your favorite ones. Everyone's talking about Europe. I know there's conversations about NATO all the time, but there really hasn't been an American effort in, I guess, the Kosovo excursion. But is Europe still a major part of our focus, or should it be a major part of our focus in terms of how our military is going to be deployed?
It's certainly one of the top four. Our European friends and allies want it to be the top.
Yeah.
And at Heritage, we would argue that there are, with truly no sarcasm, no disrespect intended here, there are two regions that are more important to Americans than Europe right now. The first and most important is our own backyard, the Western Hemisphere. It is so important to recognize the value of what President Trump has done in reestablishing American hegemony in our own hemisphere. The second is the Far East and China because of the threat posed by China. We've talked about that in previous episodes. The third, of course, would be the Middle East. I look forward to the day when we have to spend less time worrying about the Middle East because we've played some role in bringing an end to forever wars. And then Europe. But the other problem with Europe is that Americans have financed the two things, the expansion of their welfare state and their own defense, while only a few of our NATO allies have spent as much as we have in terms of the percentage of their GDP on defense. Europeans need to be willing to pony up for that. But the fifth theater, which is one that is sort of an area of a Cold War, if you will, right now, is the Arctic. And that's really the context in which Trump is talking about Greenland and establishing some sort of footing there, whether it be military or economic or something else. Those five major theaters are very important. I haven't really even touched on sub-Saharan Africa, which some of our colleagues think is vitally important, but probably not top five right now.
But it's what's interesting is our own backyard, Latin America, the Caribbean, et cetera, plus the Middle East, plus sub-Saharan Africa, that the People's Republic of China is already a major presence in all of those areas. And then, of course, Asia, obviously, they're a huge presence there. It seems like the PRC is sort of interwoven into this entire index, that they're always like one sentence away from the conclusion that you're reaching or Heritage has reached with regard to the real threat we're facing.
They are. And if you think about, say, in the section of the index that focuses on the Navy, they're in the sentence. They're not even one sentence away as it relates to the disparity in shipbuilding, but especially submarines. But I want to home in on the really underlying point there, which is in places like South America, especially sub-Saharan Africa, especially, the Chinese, through their Belt and Road Initiative, have invested in these countries. Of course, these are terrible investments for the countries to make because of the infrastructure that's built is awful and the loan terms are terrible. But that's been because of the absence of the United States. It doesn't mean that we need to have an interventionist national security policy. It just means we need to be present in these conversations, and especially with economic diplomacy. That's the thing the administration is getting right. And so ultimately, if you think about the index of military strength this way, then you would understand how we're seeing it at Heritage. We're basically in a race.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a race, say, for 5 to 10 years to get defense spending up to where it needs to be. Whatever that number is, if it's 1.5 trillion, so be it. It just needs to be justified. Maybe it's a little bit less. We're in a race to get there before the Chinese expand their influence. And the reason, for example, that the Trump intervention, appropriate intervention in places like Venezuela is very important is because it's dislodging Chinese influence from our backyard.
The part of the index that focuses on our armaments, our stockpiles, depleted resources that we have right now, when you look at the intervention that we had in Venezuela and now the recent intervention in the Middle East, do you have to recalibrate the report and the index at this point? Because is there a plan right now to build ourselves back up as rapidly as we need to, especially, by the way, I'll add to this run-on sentence, all of the stockpiles that we've already thrown to the Ukrainian defense from Russia's incursion?
The short answer is no.
Yeah.
And you will remember that someone who looks like me told you on another show that you do,
just a few months ago,
that one of the problems with funding Ukraine to the tune of $260 billion is that we were using some of our munition stockpiles that we might need in a place called Iran.
Yep.
And we're living through that right now. And we lament that reality. I have no doubt that the administration and Congress will get on the stick on this, but just know that we are in arrears when it comes to that stockpile. That's why we have to be that much more careful about how we go about military affairs.
So everything this year, of course, on the Kevin Roberts Show is shot through the prism, part of it through the 250th anniversary of our great nation. So first, Peace Through Strength. That's the title, of course, or Restoring Peace Through Strength. Are you taking that next 250-year outlook here with regard to what foundation we're building right now as you crafted this index? Is it really, this is about where we are in history going forward, isn't it?
It is. And we take two lessons from history there as we try to project those onto policymaking for the next 250 years. The one is the very obvious one coming from Reagan's phrase, peace through strength. Revitalizing that means we're not just using that as a political talking point, but actually using that as a guiding principle, if you will, for policymaking, the policymaking and the index. But the second is, I'll go deeper in history, if you don't mind. And I was rereading.
We were going to look back. I was looking forward first, but sure, you always want to do a history lesson. Let's go to it.
It's just sort of my default. I was rereading this history of Andrew Jackson, and towards the end of his presidency in the early 1830s, he was kind of fond of going to war with France because they had failed to pay.
I knew I liked Old Hickory for a reason.
Yeah, well, we averted war with France. It's probably a good thing for both countries.
Right.
This was 1834, 35. And in order to convince some skeptics in his own party of the wisdom of sort of saber rattling against France, he quoted George Washington. And we're used to hearing Washington being quoted from his farewell address on avoiding entangling alliances, which is good. We need to remember that. But there's another comment from Washington along the way when he was president, in which he said, to paraphrase him, other countries around the world will only respect the United States if she, the United States, shows a willingness to go to war when appropriate and win some.
Sounds like peace through strength.
It's peace through strength, right? You want to avoid war.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a republic, especially one animated by Judeo-Christian values as ours is, you really want peace. But when you can't, because of the terrible decisions of other countries, go to war, make it quick, beat them, and come back home. That's peace through strength.
So Washington would approve of this.
I have no doubt.
Of this approach. All right, good. Also, we've talked about Heritage's 4 cornerstones this year, which is also part of the initiative. How does this outlook on our military and your hopes through this military index and sort of making sure that we are prepared and have that readiness that we want that goes beyond marginal, how does that fit into the 4 cornerstones for Heritage?
Well, the bottom line is if policymakers in Washington accept not even all, but say most of the policy recommendations in the Index of Military Strength, then the 4 focuses of our cornerstones, the American family, obviously national security, the dignity of work and free enterprise, sort of the health of our economic system, and then citizenship, what it means to be an American, what it means to be an American republic. Those things almost take care of themselves because they've got room to breathe. In other words, on the sidewalk level, as I like to say, individual Americans get to focus on what's right in front of them, which is their preference, right, rather than on problems around the world. In other words, there is a lot of strength that comes from investing in deterrence.
So bottom line it for us, to be able to deter the next war, which is really what our hope is, like as Washington would have laid it out, we have to demonstrate that we can win that next war. Based on this index, based on what you're seeing right now, are we in that position?
I am a lot more confident now than I was 15 months ago. And I don't mean that as a political or partisan comment or even a snide comment against the former president, Joe Biden. I mean that really as a policy analyst, that 15 months ago, my colleagues and I were saying a lot of things needed to start to change, and soon, if we were going to get to a situation in which the United States would be ranked anything better than weak in our index. And a year later, we are. So there's still a lot that needs to be done. But the fact that this country was able to turn the corner so quickly from a lack of investment, a lack of strategic vision, even some open hostility toward American military power says a lot about the everyday American, but also the leader of that turnaround, President Trump. I expect more good to come.
This 2026 Index on Military Strength and Readiness is available. You can check it out as well at the Heritage website. It is a perfect diagnostic of where things are right now with regard to our military, and more importantly, looking forward where we need to be. You want to be Wayne Gretzky on things like this. You want to know where the puck is headed, and that's what they did here, all the smart guys at Heritage Foundation. Make sure you take a look at it, because peace through strength is more than just a slogan. It's a policy we all need to embrace for our future and for our children's future. Next week, we're going to take a look at Dr. Roberts' speech at the Cambridge Union, where he made the case for the conservative movement, and he told those Brits, no, the Republican Party has not lost its way. You're going to want to watch it. It's great. We'll see you then. In the meantime, my name's Larry O'Connor. It's the Kevin Roberts Show.